Hello, WiCCD members. My name is Maya Shukeri, and I am WiCCD's Education Committee Director. I'm happy to introduce our series, Finding Your Niche. In this series, we will interview female criminal defense lawyers who practice in a specific area within criminal law. The goal of our series is to highlight the work and accomplishments of female criminal defense lawyers, but it is also a way for us to introduce you to specialty areas within criminal law. We hope we can help you find your niche. Enjoy the series.
Hi, Jordana. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm well, thank you.
I'm well, thank you. And I'm very happy and thrilled that you're here with us today, taking the time. I know you had a trial. And so thank you so much for accepting to do this interview for WiCCD, Finding Your Niche. And we would like to know more about what you do. So I'll start by asking you, Jordana, what is your niche?
Murder, drug trafficking, and firearms offenses are really the categories of criminal offenses that I focus on.
And how long have you been doing this, or since when did you get to do these types of cases?
I got my first murder case, I think, in 2013. Yeah, 2013 is when I first started working on a murder, and that was it. It just, for me, the stakes being so high enthralled me, really. I don't know, for me there was a different level of responsibility than any of the other cases I've worked on, obviously, because you literally have someone's life in your hands. But there's so many nuances in a murder case. There's so many different aspects that you have to consider. There's so many different areas of evidence that you have to deal with at all times. And you're dealing, obviously, with someone whose jeopardy is so far at stake that it resonates with them and their relationship with you. And that, to me, is the marked difference between murders and other crimes of violence, is because they're at risk of a life sentence. It requires a higher degree of trust, and it develops into a better relationship with the client generally.
All right. And when you started doing murder cases, how many years had you been practicing law? At what point in your career did this start to happen?
So I got called in 2008. I started practicing criminal law in 2010 because I started my career in civil litigation. So I didn't really start in the criminal sphere at all in any fashion or form until 2010. And so I was only doing this for 3 years when I started focusing on murder. So very early on. At first, obviously, I was working with a firm, so I had guidance there, but I very quickly developed my own practice and my own focus. So by 2015, I was out on my own, and it started with 2 murders at a time, and then 4, and it's just sort of increased from there. And now I carry anywhere from 12 to 15 homicide files at any given time.
Okay, well, that's a lot of work, because each one of them is a lot of work. So that's great. And are you? So I know you have associates, but how many lawyers are there in your firm currently?
So I have 2 associates full-time that work for me. I have another colleague who assists in some of my murder files. So for example, if there's co-accused and they're pushing towards prelim dates that I don't have availability for, she'll assist on certain files. So I have, sort of on a contract basis, another senior lawyer, and then I have a student who helps run all of my set dates.
All right. And if, let's say, for someone who's a sole practitioner and who would like to take on these types of cases, is this something that is doable, or do you need to either be in a firm or have some kind of contract relationship or a partnership with someone, like a bit like the model that you have? Or can a sole practitioner do this on their own?
I think sole practitioners can. I don't ever want to say nothing is within the realm of possibilities, but I think it's hard for someone to carry on a large practice on their own. I think that trying to cover everything at once becomes either really difficult, or you have to accept that you have no other life.
Right.
And I think that's the reality, right? In order to carry on a practice that is going to sustain you financially, because you can't just have 1 or 2 murder cases at a time, given the delays in getting through to each stage, right? So
Mhm.
financially, you have to keep going and have a viable practice. And so it either requires help or it requires, really shifting the way that you do business. So when I first went out on my own in 2015, I had too big of a practice to carry out on my own, even though I was a sole practitioner. So I had contract arrangements with a lot of different lawyers, and that for me worked well for a few years. As I was taking on more and more homicide cases and significant drug trafficking cases and needed more help with smaller pieces, because at the end of the day, when someone's hiring me to do their murder trial, I can't give the whole case away. They're expecting me to personally show up for the trial, but I needed someone to help doing the back end work. Same, with drug cases. If it's a significant drug case and there's charter applications, I need help drafting, reviewing, looking at all of the sub-affiants notes and making sure they align with the ITOs, things of that nature. It was just too much for one person to do. And so that's why, first I hired one associate, now I've got two, plus a student, a third on contract. So as the practice has developed and expanded, so has my team.
That's nice. And I also wanted to ask you, and I think a lot of people are curious to know about this, because with the more complex cases, the clients, obviously, because the stakes are higher, they can become more demanding, especially if they're in custody, they can be sometimes more difficult to deal with. So can you maybe explain to us, how do you deal with clients who have more serious cases where their level of anxiety might be higher than in, let's say, a mischief case?
So absolutely. I'm really honest with clients from the first meeting, and I don't take on any new files, regardless of what they're charged with, regardless of how lucrative the file might be. I don't take on any new cases without speaking to the client first and setting boundaries. I think it's really important that the client understands the nature of the practice and the way that you're going to approach the file. So I explain to most clients, and they know that I'm really busy, but I explain that my work generally has me in court throughout the day. So if they need a lawyer that's going to speak to them, once a week and update them on nothing that's happening on the case, I'm not the right lawyer for them. If they need a lawyer that's going to coddle them through the process, I'm also not the right lawyer for them. I'm too busy and just personally too impatient for that. And I'm very honest with people about the way that I practice, but I explain that the opposite end of that is that when it's your turn for me to do your prelim, when it's your turn for me to do your trial, my focus is exclusively on you. You get my undivided attention when it's your turn. So as long as you're okay with that, obviously clients get regular updates. I visit them to show them the disclosure. I normally provide them with a copy of their disclosure on a USB so that they can look at it. I'm available throughout the process, but they're not going to get weekly updates while we're trying to obtain the disclosure, for example. Or, after the prelim dates are set, there's really nothing for me to do until it's time for the prelim. So I'm not going to be making regular visits and appearances. I think that when you set those boundaries from the start, that the client understands either they're okay with that level of attention or inattention throughout the process, or they're not, and they'll hire someone else.
Right. So
I don't want a
honesty.
client. Yeah, I don't want a client that's going to call me every week and say what's happening. Nothing's happening. Nothing happens in a week on a murder. Nothing. So when I get the disclosure, we're going to review it together. You'll know exactly what they have on you, what they don't. And then obviously when it's coming time to, prepare a client for trial, if they have to testify, I mean, that's when their visits are weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, in order to actually get them ready for the trial itself. And so they know that. And I, mostly do not have issues in that regard. It took a long time for me to get to a point where I was prepared to lose clients in being that honest, and I am. But I think it's a necessary step in order to have a practice that makes sense for you.
And did you have any difficulties in your practice, especially in the types of cases that you have that are more serious and more demanding, by virtue of being a female lawyer?
Everyone asks that. I don't think so. And I don't know if it's just a product of my personality. I don't know. I grew up as a tomboy. I stand up for myself. I don't don't easily get pushed around, but I also don't get offended. So I don't take it personally when men make, what would ordinarily be termed sexist remarks. I don't care. I don't let that bother me. So I think when you're not offended by such things, then you don't have a difficult time. And I think that as long as you stand up for yourself, and again, I think it comes down to setting boundaries, right? I'm not going to allow myself to have anybody talk down to me, whether it's a male client or a female client, although I have few and far between female clients, but it really wouldn't matter the gender of the client in their communications with me. I have never felt like I was at a disadvantage because I was female. I've never had an issue with clients because I'm female. I've never had an issue with judges, with crowds. I just don't really encounter that. And again, I don't know if it's because I just ignore it and I don't really care what's being said. I'm not that sensitive. Or it's just I'm assertive or aggressive enough that no one's making those types of comments to me.
Well, and you're certainly very confident, obviously, right now. And is this something that you've always been this way, or was it something that you acquired with time, that you became more confident?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't confident when I started. I had no idea what I was doing. I was, fumbling through the motions at every step because I started in civil. I didn't even article in criminal. And then I get tossed right in the mix because of the nature of the practice that I had. I was working at Royal and Associates, where there really isn't a whole lot of baby steps to be taken. You start, you're given a file to take to trial the next day. So there really wasn't room to not just get the work done. And I think, confidence is obviously something that everyone develops over time, but I also have never been one to be pushed around. So regardless of what I'm doing, I wasn't necessarily confident in my ability to do the work, but I certainly wasn't going to let anyone, belittle me in my dealings with them.
And I want to ask you, because you did mention that you came from a civil background, unlike many criminal lawyers who start the article in criminal and they continue all their lives working in criminal. So how did that switch happen? Was it intentional, or was it an accident, or was it, how did you get from civil, which is very different from criminal, to criminal law?
So the impetus for the switch came because I was having dinner with a cousin of mine who is also a criminal defense lawyer, Liora Shemesh. So we were out for dinner one night and she asked me about what cases I was working on. And I was describing a case that at the time I thought was really interesting, because as a new lawyer, everything is interesting.
Right.
So I don't know if it was an employment dispute, a real estate dispute, I don't know, something gone wrong. And about halfway through my explanation of the case, she stopped me and said, and I quote, "I'm so fucking bored listening to you. I don't know how you do what you do." And I was like hit by it. And she basically just said, like, this isn't you. This isn't your personality. Like, you're trying to fit yourself into this mold of what you think a lawyer should be, but you don't belong in that sphere. Like, you're here. And she was right. And so it took me a couple of months, but I just, I picked up the phone one day, called Reed Rasonic. He offered me an interview. The day that I was supposed to be interviewed is the day that Ted Royal gave his notice to Pinkowski's that he was leaving the firm. Reed rescheduled the interview, and when I returned, said he didn't even know if there would be a firm left after Ted's departure, but that Ted needed associates to help him run what was his, and continues to be a massive practice. So met with him, and very much intentional. 20 minutes into the interview, he offered me the job and I accepted, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, obviously, I don't think you ever regretted that switch. Or...
No, but that's how the switch came about. It was just, I was trying to be what I thought, quite frankly, would make my mom happy. She did not want me going into criminal law with my background. She wanted me to, just be a normal lawyer, as she called it.
Normal.
So I tried. Yeah, that was it. She didn't want me in the world of criminal anything, quite frankly. And so, yeah, so I tried, and it was not the place for me to be.
And I wanted to ask you, Jordana, did your background in civil help you at all in your practice as a criminal lawyer, or not necessarily?
Absolutely. I don't regret the time that I spent in civil, even if it wasn't ever going to be my, complete trajectory. But no, that's where I learned to be a lawyer. It's where I learned to draft letters. It's where I learned, written instructions, which I now use at every opportunity, especially the type of work that I do. So I get written instructions for everything. I mean, the degree of time spent covering your ass in civil is unbelievable. So some of that transferred to my work in criminal for sure. But still, you're reading a file, you're spotting issues, you're figuring out what is in the client's advantage and what isn't. So the overall approach remains the same. It's really just a completely different subject matter. And then procedurally, of course, it was very different. So I wasn't used to there always being a next court date. When I was in civil, you obtain court dates by telling your secretary to call opposing counsel secretary and set up a date.
Right.
And so it was, practically speaking, there was differences, but you go to court and you make your arguments, which was what I was sort of doing. In civil, I was arguing about process and procedure and never the substance of the case, which was what was missing for me. And then, you get to a trial and you're actually running a trial as opposed to negotiating a result.
And since you've had experience in both civil and now you're currently still working in criminal, do you think it is now I know that there are some lawyers who do a little bit of both, but do you think that it is possible to have a practice where you can combine both civil and criminal, or is it better to not mix both of them together?
That I can't tell anyone what's better for them, because I know that there is I hear a lot of young lawyers talking about difficulty in earning a decent living in criminal law. And it's hard. It's a grind. Money does not come easily. You have to work your way up. There's no question. So, and compared to what crowns are offering right now, obviously we've seen quite the attrition rate from criminal defense to criminal prosecution. So, young criminal lawyers that are trying to carve out a living, I understand why they diversify their practice with, doing civil litigation. Some do family, some do immigration. There are all overlaps. So can it be done? Sure. My concern is always just that the law is changing, especially in criminal, so quickly that you have to work overtime to keep up if you're also, dividing your time with other areas of practice. So I think it's hard to be really good at anything if you're doing everything. So then it becomes a question of what your practice wants to be. Like if you just want to deal with a couple of like domestics that you're going to plead out anyways on top of your real estate practice, of course it can be done. If you want to be a lawyer that's focused on doing murders or drug trafficking or serious sex assaults, especially with sex assaults, I can't even keep up with the law. I don't do that type of work. I read about it sort of tangentially on the listserv. I'm like, I can't keep up anymore. So, it's an area of the law that continues to change. The rules continue to change, the applications, the evidence continues to change, what we can and cannot do continues to change. So I don't think it's something you could dabble in and excel in at the same time.
Right. And my last question for you, Jordana, is if someone who's watching this interview is interested in developing a practice that's similar to yours, what advice do you have them, other than, I know you told us a bit how you got into it and how you slowly developed your practice, but for someone who wants to try to develop something similar to what you're doing right now, what advice would you give them?
You have to put the work in with every single case to show that you're capable of doing this work. And then you have to market yourself in order to get the work. I don't think it just falls in anyone's lap. I mean, I could be wrong. I know that it certainly didn't fall in my lap. The practice that I have is completely by design. It's not at all an accident. I picked the types of cases that I enjoy doing and the types of cases that I was good at doing, that I was winning, along with the types of clients I wanted to represent. At the end of the day, there is a difference between clients that are charged with an impaired and charged with a murder. there's a different approach. There's a different way to engage that relationship. So for me, I wanted to pick the types of cases and the type of people that I wanted to fight for. And then I marketed myself in order to build that practice. So I think it's a matter of sitting down and doing some real soul searching. What do you enjoy? What are you good at? What is it that makes the most sense for you? What makes sense financially? Obviously, you know, there's a financial element as well. Do you hate dealing with legal aid? Because if you hate dealing with legal aid, you shouldn't be doing murders. The majority, not all obviously, but the majority of murders are still done on legal aid. So if you don't want a legal aid practice at all, it's not the type of practice you want. Stick to impaired and sex assault. So I think it's a question of, you know, every individual sitting down and thinking what they want and then marketing themselves accordingly.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordana, for taking the time and for this lovely interview. And it was really my pleasure to have you as a guest on this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.